Today we're diving into two global flashpoints that, on the surface, seem completely disconnected. We're talking about a diplomatic spat over oil on one hand and a deadly border clash on the other. But are they really that different? Let's get into it.
So, the big question is, where are the world's most sensitive fault lines right now? Tensions can blow up in all sorts of ways, from some really heated words between leaders to, well, actual military force. We're going to break down two fresh examples to see what they tell us about the state of the world today.
All right, first up, we've got this really interesting diplomatic tangle playing out between the United States and India. This isn't about soldiers or tanks, it's a war of words, a high-stakes claim that's really put their complicated relationship right under the microscope.
Okay, so what lit the fuse here? It was a claim from former U.S. President Donald Trump. He said, pretty directly, that India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, had personally promised him they would stop buying Russian oil. Now, that is a huge deal, especially with all the global economic pressure surrounding Russian energy right now. And the disagreement here couldn't be more black and white. On one side, you have the U.S. claim, a direct promise was made. On the other, India's Ministry of External Affairs comes out with a very formal, very public denial, saying they're just not aware of any conversation like that. When two major partners contradict each other so openly, you know it's going to cause a stir.
So how does India explain its position? Well, it all boils down to this really important idea, national interest. India's official line is that its decisions on buying energy aren't about promises to other countries. Nope, they're driven by the practical needs of its own economy and its own people, especially when the world is so volatile. They're basically saying, look, our needs have to come first.
And you have to remember, none of this is happening in a vacuum. It makes the already tricky relationship between the U.S. and India even more complicated. And it's all happening while you've got U.S.-China trade tensions simmering and the war in Ukraine completely reshaping global energy markets. But while this fight plays out in press conferences, other fault lines are erupting in a much more violent way.
Okay, so let's shift gears now, from diplomacy to direct physical conflict. We're heading over to the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is a region where mistrust has been brewing for a long, long time, and it just boiled over, turning this flashpoint from a war of words into a battle with actual weapons. The immediate human cost of this is just staggering. These clashes along the border have killed dozens of people. And that number, it's not just a statistic, right? It's the tragic, real-world consequence of what happens when diplomacy breaks down and violence fills the void. And things went from bad to worse, fast. What started as typical border confrontations just exploded into the worst violence these two countries have seen in years. It got so bad the United Nations had to step in, pleading with both sides to back down and protect the civilians caught in the middle. That pressure led to a fragile 48-hour ceasefire, basically a temporary pause button on the fighting. But here's the tough part. Even with a ceasefire in place, the future looks pretty grim. Experts looking at the situation are saying that a real lasting peace is going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. Why? Because the fighting is rooted in these ancient disputes and a really deep sense of mistrust between the Taliban government and Pakistan. A quick truce just doesn't fix that.
So we've looked at two really different crises, right? One is diplomatic, fought with statements and denials. The other is military, fought with guns. But what's the connection? Let's zoom out for a second and connect the dots to see what bigger picture this all paints for us.
Let's just lay it out. You've got the oil dispute between the U.S. and India, a diplomatic tension between strategic partners. And then you have the Afghanistan-Pakistan border clash, a deadly military fight between neighbors. They're two totally separate flashpoints, with two very different ways of playing out.
So, what's the common thread? What ties them together? Whether it's a diplomatic fight over national interest or a violent border war over old mistrust, both of these events point to the same thing. Relationships between countries are becoming more and more strained. Nations seem increasingly willing to put their own short-term needs first, even if it means risking wider global stability. And all of this leaves us with a really critical question for the future. As these global tensions keep rising, is diplomacy actually strong enough to stop the next conflict from turning violent? That's something worth thinking about. Thanks for tuning in.